Welcome back. In our last session, we began to introduce an influence on John that shapes him growing up strong in the Spirit. As we consider the nature-nurture debate, one of the influences on John, I believe, was that because he was called to be a prophet in the spirit and power of Elijah, he's growing up in a village called Ein Karem, which means the spring of the vineyard. And this is part of starting to form within him something about prophetic understanding, that what's influencing is he's starting to see life through the eyes of the prophet. What shapes a prophet? Well, we've said that John, growing up with vineyards around him and knowing that Israel was called to be a vineyard to the nations, but living with all of this unfulfilled potential due to their rebellion, we know that he's called to call the rebellious back to the ways of the righteous. So I believe there's something in this of the prophetic nature growing within John and being shaped by his surroundings. In our last session, we saw that Israel was called to be a vine. And you may remember in John 15, verses 1 to 4, Jesus talks about his role, which is to be the true vine. Israel is living with this unfulfilled potential, and they're described in some of the prophetic writings as being an uprooted vine. Jesus, on the other hand, is showing that being planted in God and being planted by God allows us to grow good fruit. That whereas the nation of Israel is living with this unfulfilled potential, they haven't borne good fruit. Jesus teaches us that by being connected to the true vine, we become branches of the vine and we're called to bear good fruit. So I believe that there's a sense with John, knowing that he was the forerunner for Jesus and knowing what Jesus was coming to do and to be, he would be beginning to form his prophetic understanding of Jesus as the true vine through growing up in that area. Interestingly, when Jesus begins his ministry, he uses vineyards as a parable for the kingdom of heaven. So having called throughout the Old Testament for Israel to be the vineyard to the nations, Jesus begins to talk about the kingdom of heaven as a vineyard. And he tells in Matthew two parables. In Matthew 20, we see the picture of heaven and this sense of the vineyard owner allowing people to come and work in the vineyard, and whether they've come at the beginning of a day, the end of a day, or at the 11th hour, they're all welcomed into the kingdom. And there's a great picture there of God's grace that all are welcome in the kingdom of heaven, that if we respond, we all receive the grace and the joy of being invited to be part of heaven. But in Matthew 21, he tells another parable that this time he talks about the owner of the vineyard coming and being rejected, and warning the religious people about the cost of rejecting the Son of God, or the son of the vineyard owner. And in there's a gospel message for us that we're promised the kingdom, but it depends how we respond to the son of the vineyard owner. John, growing up, knowing vineyards and growing up in the Bordeaux of ancient times, in the spring of the vineyard, he would begin to be forming this seeing with the eyes of the prophet, this prophetic understanding. And he would begin, I believe, to be forming this understanding that God's solution to the unfulfilled potential of the vineyard is to be found in God by coming back into a right relationship with God. And he would see his role as stepping in with his prophetic calling to call people back to fulfill their potential. John has been given the mission to prepare the way for the Lord, to prepare the way for the Messiah. He's the forerunner. And so his understanding of the vineyard owner's son coming, he would be growing up and allowing the vineyards to shape his theology, shape his understanding of the nature of the Messiah and the mission of the Messiah. And I believe that some of that shaping would be linked into what he's inherited through the nature-nurture of his parents, of God's heart of grace, where God has called him John, that the Lord is gracious. He himself is a message of God's grace. But whereas people have grown up with the teaching and the heritage and the word, he's come anointed by the Spirit to bring that message of grace, the word and the Spirit in partnership. But actually, when we understand God's message, we understand that God is coming and saying that it's the grace that makes this possible, that we can have a relationship with God. And John, his role was to call people back in repentance, back to be the people they should be. I believe that John is beginning to see with the eyes of the prophet, and his prophetic hope is being shaped by what he sees and what he's learning from his surroundings. That as he watches the everyday thing goes on, God is downloading into him a picture of what his mission is. What is the hope that we have in God? John would look at the vines, understand that the son of the vineyard owner was coming, and he was there to prepare the way. In other words, to offer people hope that if they come to God in repentance, they can have a living relationship with the son of the vineyard owner. What's the message of hope that you have? Have you grasped what it means to know the son of the vineyard owner?